Hey there, I'm Chroma, and welcome to part 10 of Making an Abstract Adventure. Welcome back. This time, we've made a lot more progress on our cube character, namely adding the abilities to crouch and stick to walls. With this being the 10th episode of this series, it's going to be a lot longer and have more stuff packed into it. So let's get started. First of all, getting the main thing you might see out of the way, I've changed our environment here just to have things be a bit different, shaking things up. Basically just changing colors so it's a bit more like dusk time of day and making this look kind of like snow and ice and whatever's going on with these walls over here. But anyways, let's go into our code and actually no, hold on. First, we're going to go into play mode to show what's actually what's been done. So first of all, actually going over to our cube character. Now if we hold the, I think, not that key. I've switched a bunch of keys around. Yeah, if we hold the left shift key, we can crouch. We go to about half the size, and we can go under surfaces here. As well, if we let go of the button while still in a tight space like this, we'll remain crouched until we actually go out, and then we'll snap back to full height. But as well, if we let go of it at any time, we'll go back to our proper height here. As well, or at the moment, it kind of, the change sort of happens instantaneously. When we have actual proper animations and all that, then we'll make this a lot more smoother. But for now, this works for our needs. As well, while we're crouched, we aren't able to fire the shuriken things, just because that's just the way we're going to do this. Just so... because if we were in a tight space like this, trying to fire the shurikens would be problematic. So just to save that being a potential problem, we're just disabling that ability while we're crouched. As well, now, another ability that we have is while we're touching a wall, if we hold the E key, then we can just stick to the wall and sort of just kind of perch in place and be able to like fire shurikens around. This would be useful for Imagine. Eventually, if we have like moving platforms and all that, we could have you like, stick to a moving platform as it's moving along to, I don't know, have more platforming dynamics with that. As well, if we have sort of like stealth sections, you could like jump up, stick to a wall as like something walks by and then drop and move. Just stuff like that. Yeah, and as well, that all of these abilities we won't have at the beginning of the game. They'll sort of be unlocked as we go through the game. So we'll be introducing more stuff to interact with where these moves will be useful. But anyways, as well, over on our sphere character, another thing, a minor thing that's been done is that while gliding, which button? Yeah, while gliding, we can't attack just because, oh, sorry, yeah, there's that key. I've also like rearranged a lot of keys. I'll go over that in a second as well. But while we are gliding, we can't attack, just so that there's more incentive to not be always holding down the glide key, because you can get quite a lot of distance out of a glide. So it's just more small things like that to just kind of balance out some of the moves. But anyways, so now before we get into our code, I'm just gonna have this notepad document here. I've sort of showed something similar to this a few episodes ago, what the keys are going to be in the context of a controller, and that's still the same, but having, choosing what the keys are going to be in context of a keyboard controller is a bit tricky to kind of sort out what would be better going where, but this is sort of how I've decided to do things. So just having WASD to move, space to jump, as is kind of normal or standard for a keyboard with a platforming game like this, and dashing when swimming. We haven't really gotten to swimming yet, but we'll get to that eventually. Then we're having pressing the Q button to interact with things like NPCs, doors, levers, items, etc. Escape to pause. Using O to switch characters. In last story, I've already covered what that means in like a few episodes ago. So then for Cal, our seer character, we hit U for the sword swing, as well Q for the staff attack. So both attacks are through the U key. Then using IJKL for the line up arrows and lining up the shuriken, like for the shuriken, and the lunge slash. That's stuff we've already seen. But then for the rest of our abilities is where, yeah, things have been sort of changed. Basically just having left shift to glide, and left shift to crouch, and then E to hold out a shield for the reflect ability that hasn't been made just yet, but it will be probably by the next episode. So E to do the reflect shield thing, and the shield will aim in the directions of IJKL, but we'll get to that later on. And then E as well to stick to walls. So at the moment, that is those are the buttons that have been decided on. Things might change, but at the moment, these seem pretty good enough for now, and I don't think they're going to change that much, hopefully. But anyways, so that's the controls that are planned out at the moment. Anyway, so let's go into our code and actually look at how crouching and sticking to walls is actually being done. So starting off with the crouch. So first of all, we have a few private variables here for, actually, yeah, this has no public variables, but yeah, so just private variables for, so a Boolean called set to stand that is used for when we're crouching in like an actual space where we can't stand, where something we're like crawling under, and then let go of the crouch button. This is a Boolean to sort of set that, hey, we've let go of the button as soon as we exit an area where we can properly stand, then to stand as soon as possible, basically. As well as then a bunch of references to main sprite. As well, one thing that I've done, so before, up until now, the sprites that actually make up our player model, or player sprite right now, there was the main, like in this case, blue square on the base player game object itself, and then as child objects there was two like smaller squares, one called inside 1 and inside 2. Now I've sort of rearranged things so that the blue square, or the main sprite, isn't just on this base level player part, and instead is on as its own child object, and then the two inside pieces are child objects of this. Eventually, this will all only be one sprite when we've actually made proper art. This is all just like placeholder stuff. In fact, it probably won't even look like this. I might try to have like a cartoony face or something. We'll see how that looks. I don't know. Yeah, we'll see about that when we get there. But eventually that'll just be one sprite that's put on our object, so it won't be these 3 sprites. But anyway, so having just this smaller, having this child object main sprite, we can access just that sprite and then manipulating its like transform and all that without messing up too much stuff with messing with the scale of the actual thing here, because then that could mess with some like rigid body physics calculations if the scales are all weird. So we're avoiding that problem. Anyway, so we're getting a reference to that main sprite for this script. As well, over here, no, for Q, I've changed the circle collider to a capsule collider so that when we shrink him, or actually, well, yeah, when we shrink this character, then the capsule collider can like sort of like stretch out to account for him being about like half the size. If we tried to use a sphere, it would still try to remain being a sphere. So yeah, basically it's just to be able to have a better collider there when we're crouched. So then getting a reference to that collider, as well as getting a reference to the player lineup script to disable the ability to throw the shuriken when we're crouched. So then in the start function, getting a reference, or like setting the base values of all of these, so of that this Boolean to false, as well as just getting all these references down here. Then having this public void called crouch, which, as we've already seen many times in our square main or circle main script, in this case our square main script, just adding references to those functions, getting them in awake, and then in this update function calling the crouch here and the square wall stick thing when we get to that there, just so everything's being ran in the order that we want it to, and we can just disable this one function to disable everything else, as opposed to having to get references to all these and disable all of them one by one if we wanted to have the player not be able to move for some reason, as we've already kind of seen with wanting to focus on other objects. Anyways, so then if the user is pressing the left shift key, then we initiate crouching. So we're getting the main sprite and getting its scale, and then just setting that to 1.5, 0.5, and 1. That's, as you saw, that made it about half the size, but also kind of stretch out a bit. Then getting the the capsule collider and setting its size to the same thing so that the collision is still the same and halved. So then so from our reference to the player lineup script, then a Boolean that I've made there called disable aiming, setting that to true. And I guess if we just go over to, it's over here. Yeah, basically added a public, but hidden in inspector, disable aiming, and basically, yeah, down here, we're just, yeah, testing if this is true, then making sure the arrow is not active. Otherwise, then the rest of the stuff to activate the arrow, as we've seen already. Then setting set to stand equal to false, just to make sure that that is set to false and it's not accidentally set to true from somewhere else. Then otherwise, if we haven't, this is run on the frame that we first press the button. This will be on the frame that we release the button. And the else if, just so it's a bit better like optimized, because if this is true, it doesn't bother running, like even testing for this. Just slight optimization trick there. But anyway, so this is if we've pressed the button to crouch. This is if we've let go of the button to stand up. So first we're using something called a ray cast, which is basically sort of casting like an invisible line from one place to another. And then we can test if by having that line, if it hits something, then run it, in this case, like running code to stand or not. So using physics2d.raycast, because we're dealing with everything or most things in 2D as far as collision is concerned, and having the raycast start at the in this case the cube's position, and then going up and then going by like 0.5 units. So that's just the distance that the line, sort of kind of like the length of the line in this case. And then this here, long story short, this is has to do with what layers it's checking. So for example, or so for most of our environment objects, it's on this environment layer, which is layer 8. Long story short, basically just having this the two of the less than symbol, and then whatever layer we're testing for is what we have here. It's something called a layer mask, but we're not going to get into the specifics of what that is here. But basically just having one less than then the number of the layer that we're testing for, which in this case is 8 because that's our environment layer. But anyway, so if we have this raycast line test, if this will come out as a Boolean for true if it's hit something, or false if it didn't hit something. If it's true, then we hit something, so we want to be able to stand, but we can't stand yet because we're under something. So this set to stand Boolean, we're setting that to true. Otherwise, we're running this function just down here to stand, and it's down here because there's 2 places in our code where we run that, so it's just being cleaner with not repeating code. But we'll get to down there in a second. But if we haven't just pressed the button and we haven't just raised the button, or basically at any other case, so in this equivalent of an update frame, we're just testing if set to stand was true from like up here, and running the same raycast calculation again. If this comes out as false, meaning it didn't hit something, meaning we can stand now, then we're running the same stand function as before, which down here is basically just undoing the work that was done up here. So getting the main sprite, setting all of its scale components to 1, then getting the capsule collider, setting it to 1 as was its default values, then getting the player lineup script, disabling or re-enabling the aiming by setting disable aiming to false, and then setting set to stand to false. So yeah, that basically covers this square crouch script. Now let's move on to, actually, one other thing. We're going to move on to then the square stick and how that's working, but as well, in the player health script, another thing that was done. So initially we had an array of sprite renderers for having that flicker effect of when we take damage. Now we're just getting a game object reference to the main sprite, just getting that game object reference down here, and then down in any place where we disabled or we're causing like the flicker effect or disabling all 3 of those sprites, we're just getting that game object reference and turning it off. So for example, down here, by setting it false, waiting a small amount of time, then setting it true, that's doing effectively the same thing as before, just only dealing with that one game object. So yeah, minor difference, but actually it makes, I don't know, makes things a bit cleaner looking here. And yeah, we don't need to get references to the other two images because they're child objects of the main sprite. Anyways, so then, yeah, here we already covered with the disabled aiming as well, just the button that we're pressing. Oh no, yeah, that's the same. But yeah, so the disabled aiming thing that we've looked at already here. Anyways, so onto the square stick of how we're sticking to walls. So first of all, we have, as well, no public variables, everything's just privated. So we have a bool for can stick of whether or not we can stick, and we'll look down at its use down here. Yeah, then a private bool for whether or not we are currently sticking, and these two are treated differently. Actually, down here, this is active while we're holding down the button of whether or not we can stick if we hit a wall, because yes, we're holding down the button, and then this is used for when we're actually stuck against a wall, and we'll look at why those two are different down here. But then we get a reference to the rigid body as well as the player attack script, and the square wall jump and the square shuriken throw, basically just to access some variables on here to disable and re-enable certain things, just to have certain things work with while we are stuck to a wall, as we'll look down here in a second. So then we're just getting all the references to those objects. So then we have this public void stick function, which again is the same as we've seen up with all of these other functions, and it's right there. So yeah, so it's running in update, basically, yeah. So then in this stick function, we're testing first if we've hit the E key and on the first frame that we've pressed it, then we're setting can stick to true. Otherwise, actually I can put in else here, as we've done in the crouch script. So then otherwise, if we've just released the key, then we're setting can stick to false, and undoing some things that we'll look at in a second when we show what we're actually doing to make us stick to the wall. So down here we have an on collision stay script and an on collision exit script. So yeah, so first of all, on collision stay, we're testing if whatever we just collided with, first of all testing if we can stick because we're holding down the button, and we're not sticking already, and if the thing we collided with is on layer 8, the environment layer that we saw before. So then, if all those things are true, we hit something that we can stick to, and we are ready to stick because we're holding down the button. So first we're setting the gravity scale to 0, then we're setting this rigid body's velocity to the same x velocity as before, but then just zeroing out the y velocity. Then taking, getting references to, so for the player attack script, an air boost override Boolean that I've made. So for that small air boost that we get when we do an attack, we don't want that to happen if we're stuck to a wall, because we want to just stay where we are on the wall. So I've made actually I can just go to it over here. I've made a Boolean for like called air boost override that if it's set to true, then down here when we're doing the attack, it's basically, if it's true, we're not going to do the air boost. And as well, the square shuriken throw has the same thing, air boost override. If it's set to true, exact same thing, we won't do the air boost, even if we're not on the ground. So, so we're setting that to true, and the square shuriken ones to true as well. The square wall jump having another thing called fall override, that was over here. Yeah, a Boolean here called fall override, which was how the wall jump works, which right when we collide with a wall, we start this like slow fall for when we're not sticking to a wall, when we just collide with a wall normally to be able to wall jump off of it. We're just disabling that because that function also dealt with messing with the gravity scale, which is not what we want. While we're stuck to a wall, we want it to stay at 0, so we're not having these parts of the code run that are setting the gravity scale to other things while we're sticking to a wall. So that's what that is doing. And then we're setting sticking to true. Yeah, and then being set to true or false is to be used in other places. Yeah, as we'll see momentarily. Yeah. So then on collision exit, actually it's used down here. If we are sticking and we just collided or left the collider of something on layer 8, the environment layer, then we're undoing all the work that was done up here, which is that we're setting the gravity scale to 1 and then setting all these things to false as we look over here, as well as then setting sticking to false. And then up here as well, we're doing kind of the same thing, which is that when we release the E key, we're setting can't stick to false, the gravity scale to 1, and the fall override to false, and sticking to false. In fact, actually looking at things, I should probably have this do the same 3 things there. So I'm just going to do that. And in fact, then also to be more efficient, I can make one function down here that both of these call. I'll do that after this recording. But yeah, so basically these are both doing the same things of just undoing the work of here to stick to a wall. So that is how that's done. But then one other thing I want to look at, that was an addition I made, or a change I made to the circle character, is that on the circle glide script, we got a reference to the player attack now, and getting a reference in start. And then while we are gliding, we are then setting, where is it, over here, this disable attack boolean that I've made that we'll look at in a second, setting that to true, basically disabling our ability to use an attack while we're gliding. And then if we're not pressing this button, so we're not gliding, then setting it to false. So over on our player attack script, right beside the air boost boolean that we just looked at, we have another one called disable attack, and it's basically, yeah, over here, if this disable attack was true, then we're not attacking at all. So that deals with all of that. So basically making sure we can't attack while we are gliding, just so that there's more incentive to not be just constantly gliding. But anyways, that then covers all of that code. Perfect. So we're getting pretty close to being finished our characters then. We're more or less finished with our cube character now. Lastly, the sphere's reflect ability needs to be done, which won't, I don't think, initially have a lot of coding to it. It'll mainly be when we make things to reflect off of the sphere when it has the shield up. That'll be when most of the coding gets involved with that. Same thing with the cube's crouch. I want to be able to have at some point like stealth things where if you crouch near something, maybe like a bush or something, there'll be an animation of you like hiding behind it, and that could be for like stealth reasons, but that'll be more put in place when we actually code like a bush or something to hide behind, or actual, like, I don't know, enemies that have like a field of vision and, you know, having stealth sections like that. When we get into that stuff will be when we worry about coding more of the things that these abilities are used for. But anyways, yeah, that'll be that. As well, then also having an interact function as well, which will be, yeah, if we have like NPCs, doors, levers, basically having its own dedicated button for interacting with that stuff. But once we've done those 2 things, then we're basically done coding our players. So we're getting close to being done that, and then we can start actually building more level stuff. So that'll be pretty cool. Having more collectibles, actual things to interact with, maybe enemies, moving platforms, and all that sort of stuff. Swimming, that's something I want to be able to do. And actually swimming will be making more stuff for the player. So I guess it'll be after we're done that as well, that we'll be done our players. But anyways, yeah, I have a big list of potential gameplay elements. So yeah, we'll just be kind of making a lot of the things one by one until we have this sort of demo level done, then actually making some kind of test level out of it. And then once we're done that, we basically have a lot of the functionality done for the rest of the game, more or less. So then we then get into actually doing level design, planning some levels, then making the levels. I'd like to have like a hub world in between the levels. There'll be a lot of coding that'll go into that. And yeah, that'll be kind of be some snowballing from there. It's kind of a thing with game design that like the more we make, the faster we're able to make more things. So yeah, looking forward to when we get around to that. But anyways, that's enough rambling for me for now. So thank you all so much for watching. Yeah, next time I will do as I said, be continuing our players. As always, we're getting close to the end of that. But yeah, again, thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you around.